Hello everybody. After posting my last story, Winter, I thought maybe I should post another story. And so this is one I've been working on for a while, and I hope you enjoy it. It's called Love Lost. Panting for air, the small white plumes faded to nothing above her as Nancy fell to the snowy floor. Her face dug deep into the powder, sharp spikes of cold drilling through her tightly closed eyelids and twisting at the back of her skull. Her nostrils flared, filling with the cool, crisp pellets of snow that covered every square inch of the darkened landscape. The thick blanket of cloud had rolled in quickly, blotting out the Arctic sun. She opened her mouth to scream, to call his name in one last, panting breath, but the unforgivingly cold Arctic twilight took that from her. She laid there, face down in the snow, the ice creeping into her veins, through her muscles, and teasing her bones, as a light blanket of fresh snow covered her twitching corpse. William lay still in the calm serenity of the midnight sun. His body was in a shocked state of euphoria. His extremities were numb, senseless as they spread across the tundra. His cheeks pulsated between cool hills of ice and burning spires of magma as the Arctic took his senses from him one at a time. He couldn't remember when he had stopped walking, or even how he ended up on his back, staring at the useless sun as it burned its way across the horizon. He had been walking for what felt like days. At one point, his legs just started moving of their own accord as his mind began to separate from his body. Breathing was becoming more laborious now. He could feel his diaphragm flexing hard to pull the painful shards of icy air into his lungs. He wet himself, his last sensation being a feeling of warmth dissipating across his torso as gentle flakes began to pile on his lifeless frame. Nancy was only going to be gone a minute. She was just taking a short half-mile march from their camp out over a small ridge to the east. She had her crevice pole, and her snowshoes were lashed to her back should she encounter any soft drifts. She wanted to get a look at the glacial range from the opposite side. The undulations reminded her of an abstract sculpture she had seen once in Japan. She spent a lot of time in Japan. She used to travel there often. She loved Japan more than anywhere else in the world. That is, after all, where she first met William. William stood on the crest of the icy hill Nancy had passed over less than an hour ago. He stood there, eyes squinted against the harsh glare of the forever dawn, scanning the field of undisturbed snow that ran between him and the horizon. 10 minutes after Nancy had disappeared over the peak of this tiny hill line, the blizzard hit. It was brief, but devastating, dropping nearly 1.5 feet of snow across the barren landscape. William's guides had forced him to hunker down in the bubble tents with them. They did all they could short of sedating him to keep him from tearing out of the tents and running through the wall of snow towards the ridge. Towards her love. When he could scream no more, he cried. The wind whipped sheets of frozen snow at the thin sides of their tent. He continued to sob as the whistling storm slowly subsided. Now here he was, standing alone outside, staring at an empty field without a sign that she had ever been there. The cold that seemingly took his Nancy was now taking from him his ability to weep for her. Enraged, he ran down the hill into the barren wilderness, screaming at the elements, screaming for them to take him instead of her. He'd give his life to save hers. He dropped to his knees, his head falling into his hands, and whimpered. But again, no tears came. His eyes ached, jagged needles of pain stabbing at his heart, barbed edges ripping at his soul. The blood in his veins boiled, and he rose, faltering only slightly. Determination settled itself on his face. Determination and anger. Pure, rooted anger for a world that would take his love from him. That unbridled passion for Nancy pushed him forward, staggering one unsteady foot in front of the other. He had no stick, no snowshoes, not even an emergency rescue kit, should she have fallen into a chasm or been blown over and covered by the winds. But none of that mattered to him. Getting to her was all that mattered. Finding her was all that mattered. Nancy was all that mattered. Nancy, and the spark of life that she carried within her. Japan was in the middle of a heat wave. It was the warmest summer on record. The mercury peaked at well over 40, and Nancy was loving every minute of it. She spent her days on Obida Beach, thoroughly enjoying the serenity of the glass-smooth bay. The nights she spent hopping in and out of the smoke-hazed rooms and pulsing lights of the clubs and bars that dotted Shibuya and Shinjuku. It was in one of those places, where your pulse matched the throbbing beat of the synth pop while colored rays of light strobed all around you, that she first saw William. He was sidled up to one of the translucent bars that slowly oscillated between white, pink, and purple. The reason she took notice of him was because he was chatting with a woman with bright pink spiked hair and a man who could have been 100 years old. It was such an obtuse correlation of bodies. The second time she saw him, he was learning, with absolutely no luck, to windsurf. The day was humid, with a haze that hung just above the hot pavements that surrounded the sandy stretch of beach between roadways. There hadn't been the slightest breeze for days, yet for some reason, William thought it would be a good day to learn to windsurf. She slid up beside him at the rental kiosk as he returned his board and sail. His instructor kept repeating to him over and over what a good student he was, and he smiled and thanked him in terribly broken Japanese. "Hi," she said, her body next to his, just tilting her head ever so slightly in his direction. "Hi," William said back, barely darting his eyes in her direction before taking a double take of her. "Oh, hello." He smiled, his entire face lighting up. This wasn't the first time William had seen Nancy. It was probably the 7th or 8th. Although it wasn't hard to miss her, what really caught his eye was how she carried herself. She moved with confidence, like each step of her foot, each sway of her arm was just meant to be exactly as it was. They were married 9 months later in a traditional Mayan wedding ceremony, performed by an authentic shaman. Everything from the steam baths to the wafting scent of cinnamon recreated the ancient rite at the peak of Koba. Their love of the world left around them made them want to try new and different things. Together, William and Nancy hiked the cragged heights of the Himalayas, searching for a fabled hermit who spoke in a language no one understood, and yet blessed everyone who came his way and sent them off enlightened. They snorkeled the world's reefs and scubaed the deeper depths, even freediving once in the Azores, where they spoke silent signals to the remaining deep-sea dolphins as they danced about the clear blue ocean. The thrill and exhilaration of that intimacy with the water, of that intimacy with nature, brought them closer together still, their bodies floating freely, the rising ocean isolating them. They went base jumping off the dried-up remains of the Howick Falls in South Africa, the warm, spiraling updrafts of the wind buffeting their suits in a pantomime of winged flight before their chutes snapped them to attention and they slowly floated across the mucky basin that stretched out to the receding jungle below them. Ziplining the Amazon Rainforest Reserve while the gorgeous reds and blues and yellows of flocks of endangered macaws kept pace with them below. The songs of the tamarin echoed off the canopy as the world fell away from them and they only knew each other, only knew love. They even planted trees in Brazil, first as part of a group trying to reforest the area, then just the two of them. They spent a week on their own planting for themselves, for the earth. They planted to leave the world proof that they had once been here, once existed, once cared. The frozen tundra of the Arctic was the location of their 21st trip together, a trip to the top of the world, and apparently a trip to their end. William fell on his back in the middle of an endless plain of white. He laid still for what felt like days, but must have only been hours. Wisps of streaky clouds spread above him, replacing the tumultuous ceilings of darkness that had swirled during the storm. He could feel the cold crystallizing through his veins, spreading across his face and locking his slowly fading eyes open. His half-dead retinas felt nothing as they gazed, unwavering, at the midnight sun that mocked the barren landscape about him with its false heat. The brightness reminded him of Nancy, the way the sun kissed her cheek as it streamed through their blinds, her face nestled into the pillow beside him as he laid there staring at her. She would smile, and he knew she was dreaming of him, of them, her hand resting delicately on her abdomen. Now here he laid, all by himself, on a different sheet of white, covered by a cold, thin blanket of snow. Nancy's vibrant glow wasn't there to warm him, yet his cracked white lips curled up in a smile as he pictured her by his side forever. "Sir!" The young assistant was scurrying towards the archaeologist, his puffy Arctic environment suit causing him to trot along. I think I found something." He waddled over towards the youngling, his own cumbersome warming suit slowing his movement. The smaller figure hurried off, beckoning the aged scientist to follow. It was difficult to follow. Keeping pace with such an exuberant youth, especially under these circumstances, would have been difficult even without his advanced age. He finally reached his charge, who stood by the marked-off dig area. The sensation of excitement that spilled off his assistant was nearly palpable, and the older man's heart began to quicken in its pace. Turning the face shield of his helmet down to peer through the carefully carved tundra and permafrost, he paused before dropping to the soft white powder that gathered under the mouth of the excavation. There, 3 feet beneath the edge of the solid permafrost surface and under a thin layer of translucent ice, were the perfectly preserved figures of a fully clothed man and woman. The man laid on his back, one arm outstretched, hand half closed, almost pointing towards the woman, who laid on her side, arms curled up in front of her, as if reaching for the man's hand. "Sir?" his assistant said. "It's the proof," said the senior scientist, his words coming in languid stretches as he took in the whole scene. "It's the proof of life." "You mean," the assistant trailed off, comprehending the implications of their discovery. "Yes," he said, twisting the sealing ring at the base of his helmet, a short, sharp hiss escaping as the cool air danced along the particles as they escaped the suit's warm environment. "This proves the theories." He slid the helmet off and squinted against the cold, his shiny dark carapace tightening noticeably against the chilly air as his snout spilled plumes of sublimating moisture into the air. "Ages ago, before our time, there was life on this planet." His eyes darted around the adorned bodies that laid out before him. "Sentient, warm-blooded mammals walked this planet." And so it came to pass that their discovery was the first in a series of discoveries that proved the existence of ancient species of bipedal mammals that not only roamed the planet, but appeared to dominate it. Their diminutive stature didn't appear to hold them back as relics and ruins began to surface around the globe. The remains of grand structures and developments abounded, and nearly just as quickly they seemed to stop. It was unclear what led to their downfall, but as a testament to Nancy and William, who froze to death that fateful day, their outstretched arms were forever immortalized mere feet apart, never touching. Neither of them ever knew how close they had come to finding each other, how close they were to one another for all that time. Their love was lost and never found. I hope you enjoyed that story. A little bit of science fiction, a little bit of environmental stuff going on there. Let me know what you thought, and if you have any questions about it, I'd be happy to answer them. And I'll do another one of these soon, hopefully, if you all enjoy it. Thanks again.